Across the last 8 years, I've tried with 7 different languages and I am fluent in none. Does this sound familiar at all? Now, every time I jumped between languages, I genuinely thought it was a fault of the language. I thought that there would just be an easier language to study instead. Oh, don't worry, I'll come back to that one. But it never seemed to change. No matter what I did, the way that I'd approach every language would still end the same. And I had no idea why. I kept jumping from language to language, then from language learning app to language learning app to no avail. So what broke the cycle for me? What kept me the most consistent I've ever been with languages before? Last year I studied Japanese for 9 months straight, only stopping in between for 1 month. That's the longest I've consecutively ever focused on one language. And although theoretically, yes, you can say that it wasn't for 9 months exactly straight, I was still very proud that I didn't give up and that I didn't point the finger at the language. But how did I do it? So I went from apps such as Pimsleur, such as Duolingo, using all these different methods basically that were suggested popularly to inquire about languages. And what you'll find is that there's not a lot of freedom. What I mean by this is that with an app such as Duolingo, you have these pre-made sentences suggested to you with all this vocabulary that you never got the choice over learning, and it's thrown right in front of you and you have to pass it, you have to get it correct, and you have to get to the other thing, and it almost gatekeeps you from being able to learn what's essential and what you deem essential. And because of that constraint of freedom, the whole process wasn't fun. And that was the main reason that I jumped from language to language, learning method to learning method, was because the process was not fun. That was the core problem. And lo and behold, it wasn't actually any of the language's faults. It was the method I was using. Now, I've brought up an app such as Duolingo. It's very often on with people in terms of how it works and if it doesn't work for them. For me, it's never worked and it will never work, just because I do not find the approach to language acquisition, language learning that Duolingo offers to be very interesting. That's just my personal gripe. So I thought I was going to find it elsewhere. I tried with an app such as Pimsleur, quite different. Has flashcards. You can focus on specific words. And the main course of the language was in audio form. Course referring to the specific level with the lessons that you'd go through. There was about 30 lessons per level, and depending on the language, there'd be more levels or less levels. So for one time, when I first started properly studying Japanese by my own, I was using Pimsleur. Now, this was about a year ago, and I would have stopped about 11 months ago from now. For the same reason as anything else, it just was not fun. There was something constricting my freedom of use case with the language and my ability to learn the new words that I actually wanted to learn words that actually seemed worth it. I didn't have that ability to pick and choose. I was basically just shown information and I had to consciously remember it, because if I didn't remember it, then it would come up later and I'd feel guilty for not knowing it. I'd feel stupid and I'd feel humiliated by the very app that I'm using in order to make me feel smarter, in order to make me feel like I'm getting somewhere with the language learning process. So from this moment of realization in which it was like, damn, I've tried And it wasn't just Duolingo and Pimsleur. I tried an app called Drops, and it was just the same process over and over again. However, I'd say Pimsleur was the longest I've ever stuck out with a language learning app. And I get to this position where I just don't know what to do. I've gone through this phase so many times, and I was really scratching my head. Maybe it was a problem of language learning apps. So I went onto YouTube, and lo and behold, the video that I watched within, I believe, a week after pondering, what else besides Pimsleur can I use? It told me that it wasn't an app you need to follow. It's simply the understanding of how we learn languages, which we don't. We acquire them, and you might have heard me use that piece of vocabulary before. Now, acquisition is the subconscious version of learning. I'm sure you might have already heard it if you've watched some of my YouTube videos before. You're probably rolling your eyes going, okay, acquisition. Keep talking about it. Why is it so important? Acquisition's important because if acquisition did not exist, we would not be fluent and native speakers in our own language. You would not be able to understand me. And you don't have to consciously focus on every word that I'm saying. I don't have to focus on every word that I'm saying consciously to be able to communicate, because it is a subconscious process. It's done so in a way in where I, as a native speaker, am already so familiar with the language, it's rare for me to make mistakes. However, I still might pick up on it consciously and change the sentence. I still stutter, I'm sure you do. But we can still understand each other, and we can still pick up on these small differences because we've gotten so good in mutual language in which we converse in, which is English right now. And the same for literally anyone else growing up, acquiring any other language. As a baby, you're presented so many new vocabulary in different contexts. And this is where I'm going to get into how acquisition takes place. Basically, it's your senses doing the job. It's your senses picking up on both primarily the visual and the audible worlds, and being able to connect some level of mystery through, not mystery, I guess mystery, but unknown variables, such as this, for example. If I wave this in front of a baby's head, never seen these before, and I said, these are glasses, this is my glasses, they'd be like, oh, damn, I've never heard glasses before. Well, depending on if they've heard it or not. Let's just say they haven't, and let's just say they haven't seen this as well. So if they're familiar with this is statements already, they're going to see this, and on a subconscious level, without even having to study what the hell these are, just, by looking at it, getting a quick glance, and hearing the vocabulary associated with the noun, that piece of vocabulary may well be acquired in that very moment. It really just depends on what your own mind deems important at the end of the day. You don't really get to pick and choose. However, this is still a fundamental process in regards to language and how we pick it up, and basically any other piece of information on a subconscious level. It all is assessed on the subconscious level first, and if it's a bit more convoluted, if it's a bit more complex, then yes, we will need to study about it. And what these language learning apps that I'm talking about do is they focus primarily on learning and having to always be so consciously involved to understand new vocabulary, new grammar concepts, where depending on the language it can come very easily. If there's not too much nuance with a particular piece of vocabulary, you can pick it up the same way that you picked up glasses, I'm sure, as a baby or as an infant, or whenever you heard this goddamn word, saw this object, and was able to make sense of it. You didn't have to. I guarantee 99% of you watching right now did not have to consciously focus on what this was. It just came up enough to where you understood what it was. And that is the connection. That's the type of connection we want with the target language in which we want to be learning, which we want to understand. So how do you develop this? Well, upon hearing about acquisition for the first time, I was scratching my head as well. I was like, how do I use this? And immediately afterwards, I found out about a method called immersion. Now, this is using either audio-based or just literally any way to engage with the language, either spoken, written, or both together. So the main ways you can engage with language is through listening, and then like through watching, which is listening and, involving your senses, and then involving your visual senses, your eyes. You get exposure to the context of what's going on, usually in a specific, whether it be like the news or a movie or TV shows, you get context visually to back up what is audibly being described. And then you can just read. And for me, reading didn't seem like the most effective thing to do, especially starting out with a language like Japanese. I was just like, yeah, I've heard of this thing called kanji. It might not be a very good idea initially. How about listening? I guess I could do that, but it's like, how am I going to figure out what these words are in isolation? I haven't even studied the language first. How about I do both? How about I watch some stuff? So what I did was I took this concept of immersion and applied it actively through watching shows, particularly anime. And I found out about this other tool at the time on YouTube, not a language learning app per se, called Migaku, in which I started using alongside immersion to provide me dual subtitle support. So I was getting exposure to the written language in Japanese, even though I didn't understand it all. Just having that repetition there was so good, because on a subconscious level, I was getting exposure to all this information, and it was helping far more than I could ever conceive. Months later, and it feels like the same concepts I saw initially that were very foreign to me, that had been repeated over the course of months, became effortless to read, effortless to even produce in spoken terms. Even though I wasn't speaking Japanese, I could very much pronounce that in my own head and then speak it, and then possibly even use it within a sentence. However, once again, speaking is completely different and a part of the output process rather than the input process. What I'm discussing right now is input, not output. Output is definitely something you'd want to be concerned about later on into your language learning journey. But unfortunately, and this is why I'm making this video, is a lot of people don't get to that stage. Or if people get to language learning, they get so overwhelmed by everything they need to be doing at once. So they're trying to speak with someone, and they're trying to do their Duolingo lessons every day, and it just becomes very stressful. It almost feels like you're constantly mocking your ability and your knowledge within the language if you're studying via a method that doesn't actually leverage a concept such as acquisition, such as comprehensible input. And that's why, for me, the funnest, most intuitive and accessible way to engage with languages I've ever come across and used for myself is through immersion. Through immersion with subtitle support, dual subtitle support, and the tool that also allows for flashcard creation, which is Migaku. And then there's also another tool that I use for more niche languages such as Thai, which I'm studying right now, called Language Reactor. And I can make flashcards, I can track these words, and it's effortless. I can very briefly, and I'm talking seconds here, scan over a sentence in which I'm watching a show or something in Thai, for example, and using my mouse, I can hover over any word, any piece of vocabulary that I want to be able to see the direct translation in English. I can look more about it, I can search up about it, but I have availability and the accessibility of being able to specifically single out pieces of vocabulary. Especially, this is really important for a language that has different grammar from English, because if you were trying to do word for word translation, it just wouldn't work. And I also would suggest you drop that mindset getting into language learning, because that's what ruined my connection with German, for example. I had no idea the actual meaning of certain words. I only knew phrases and how that immediately translated to English. I want to give an example. Es tut mir leid means I'm sorry in English, but it doesn't really. I don't want to go into too much depth, but basically, that's 4 words in German. Es tut mir leid. Es means it. Tut, I think, is like the past version of to do. So like did or does, I really cannot explain. It's been a very long time since I've touched German, so do forgive me if you're a German speaker and I'm getting your language wrong. Mir. I really can't explain this, but it basically means my, I think. And Leid means sorrow from my knowledge, or like pain. So it does me like great pain. Basically, that's the general translation if you're trying to Englishify it. But the thing is, for some reason, we've Englishified it so much that's just become I'm sorry somehow. How is it I'm sorry? Theoretically, I am sorry is only 3 words. Like, why is that the mindset towards it? That's what I learnt via Duolingo. It didn't explain to me that. It didn't explain to me every single word and the logic behind the phrase. It wasn't very helpful. And when you're learning in this way, the language just becomes more foreign to you. It becomes harder to understand in the rules of the target language, and you're almost distancing it from yourself even further on a subconscious level by trying to compare it to English and by thinking in English all the time when learning the language. So, getting back to immersion, there was so many opportunities for me to single out, not always create flashcards, because it's in the matter of a click. I actually have one other video up at the moment which you can check out that showcases my use case of Migaku, and it's a really, really helpful app or tool per se, in which I use for immersing via Netflix. You can use it for YouTube, you can use it for Disney Plus, or another app called Rakuten Viki. I don't personally use that, but I've used all 3 former apps before and still consistently do. So check that video out. I might have it pop up here so you can go check it out. Still not sure about the technicality of YouTube and how it works. I'm getting better at it all though. Going back to immersion though, being able to engage with any piece of content that I want. And I think I was at a big advantage, especially with Japanese, because personally, so far, in comparison to any other language that I've studied, the Japanese library of content, whether it be anime, whether it be movies, or just general Japanese TV shows, I guess, or the news, or whatever it is, everything I engaged with so far, which has predominantly been anime and then Japanese movies, has been extremely interesting. You know, I always love to watch a good story. So personally, I felt far more connected to the whole process. And at times, It wouldn't even feel like I was learning or acquiring a language, because there was something going on in the background to my enjoyment with the piece of content that I was engaging with. And that's the best thing that you can do. You quite literally are productive by doing something such as watching a movie or a TV show on Netflix. Imagine that. Imagine how many people right now can go from watching Netflix, standard, boring ass. Okay, well, that's a bit of an opinion, so I'm not going to throw it in there. Imagine someone going from watching standard Netflix to also having the desire to learn language, and then realizing a tool and realizing these concepts such as immersion, acquisition, all this, and being able to habitually, basically hardly changing anything, go from basically only connecting with, and it is quite a mindless thing, I would argue a lot of people do, which is watch TV shows, movies. Personally, I didn't do that before I started immersing, because I didn't feel very productive doing so. But now I quite literally do, if it's in another language, if it's in Japanese, if it's in Thai, if it's in whatever that isn't English. And to some extent, I guess you could be like, oh, well, if I watch it in English, then it trains my English skill. Yeah, sure. If you're native, whatever. If you enjoy it, do whatever you'd like, by all means. However, I'm making this proposition to language learners and people interested, and I'm sure that if you're watching up until this point, you are interested in language learning, and particularly this new concept of language acquisition. And, if you were to know the power that you have over being able to acquire a language almost in the background to your own enjoyment, with watching a TV show, watching a movie, whatever is just enjoyable to you, you can engage in that same content consumption, only swap out the main language, maybe watch specifically content natively filmed within that target language in which you're planning on studying, and you can have English subtitles up as well. I'd suggest dual subtitles, because otherwise you try to Englishify everything that's being said and you can't really understand or have the same connection. Like, you can't make flashcards and all that. So if you're going to immerse, I would definitely suggest to have a tool such as Migaku or Language Reactor on the side, in order for you to be able to quickly glance at translations, and also within the press of a button make a flashcard, and then be able to review that in future, connect yourself back to the same moment in which you created that flashcard, and acquire the word even better, because that's the same connection that I have with so many words within all of my flashcard decks across all the different languages I've studied. I have this personal connection to some extent with every flashcard that I've consciously chosen to study, and if I have selected it and it hasn't been as relevant to me, I always had the freedom of being able to get rid of it. And that's the main thing that I want to convey in this point right now, is you have the freedom over tracking, over choosing what vocabulary you want to study in your language of choice. You don't have to be a slave to the vocabulary that maybe your past self has set for yourself, or you don't have to be a slave to an already generated course such as Duolingo for a specific language, and where you have to learn all this unnecessary. To you can basically go through learning a language, and there will be what seems like relatively unimportant words that'll come up, and you're kind of just actually, I don't really want to learn this. But you still have to if you're going to use a method such as that. Whereas if you switch to a method such as immersion, using a tool such as Migaku or Language Reactor on the side, you have complete comfortability and complete freedom over choosing what you want to consciously learn. And the best thing is, most of the time, and when I flag a new flashcard, flag a new word to be sent for me to review later via my flashcard software, I have to some extent already acquired the word. And sometimes it'll be instantaneous. I still remember the first word that I ever acquired in Japanese. Really, really properly acquired it. And that was the word mura, which means village. I believe that's the pitch for it as well. It's higher, mura. And it was really stupid. I think it was in the second episode of this anime that I was watching called The Four Nights of Apocalypse. And the main character basically had like no connection with the outside world. He was like 16. He finally got off the top of this mountain. I really hope I'm not spoiling anything for someone who wants to watch this anime. And yeah, he gets to the surface of the world, you know, exposure to all these new things. What the hell? Oh my god, there's people here as well. And he starts talking to these people and they're like, yo, we're going to go to the local village. And this character starts geeking for no reason. He's like, muna, muna. And it's like really cringe, atypical anime kind of stuff. I guess you can find it cringe or not. At the time, I was just like, what the fuck is going on? And it was so comical, so stupid. And at the same time that bro was screaming out mura, there was like houses in the background showing up. And then I looked at the translation and I'm like, oh, what the fuck? I already knew that he basically meant village before I'd even looked at the translation. And that's literally how acquisition occurs. You might not acquire every piece of vocabulary that you come across within the language. But so long as you're able to just enjoy the process, and then, you know, there will be some moments in where what you're watching will be completely open, and that is considered as comprehensible input. That was perfectly comprehensible to me. It was only one word. It was the perfect context because bro was shouting out the word in a very clear way. He had repetition to it, and there was the visual descriptor of a village within the background as well. It was literally perfectly comprehensible for someone at my level. And can I remember every other word after that I subconsciously acquired? No, because once again, it is subconscious. I'm even surprised that I specifically remember that. Hell, I probably actually acquired something before that. This is just the only thing that I was really, really conscious of because it was a really, really stupid moment for me and it really stuck out. And that's always going to be in the back of my head whenever I think of my connection with Japanese as a language. Is one of the first, if not the first word that I ever properly acquired in the language. And, you know, just go about immersing in a language with that same mindset, in that same kind of way, and you'll get very far. Now, is that all I suggest for you to have for learning a language, acquiring a language whatsoever? For something like Japanese, definitely not. On the side, I definitely had to look into certain grammar concepts, and the way in which I did that was I went onto YouTube and I came across a certain creator called Kua Dolly, who was extremely helpful. She has a whole structure course on Japanese, teaching the grammar and the logic of the language. Trust me, you will need to know some of it. You cannot guess the logic of such a sophisticated language like Japanese. And if you are willing to do that, be willing to study the language for 5 years plus. Basically, that's all I'm going to say to you, is it's really difficult to make sense and comprehend what you don't already, what isn't already clear. You know, you don't understand these messages, so the only way in understanding them is by, to some extent, incorporating conscious learning, in where you can pick apart different examples and find a pattern and be able to discern the logic and the underlying logic that's going on within a particular sentence, within anything that the language uses, you know. So that's another really helpful thing. And I did bring up flashcards as well. I've made other videos covering these topics before. Once again, I'll point you back to the video I released maybe 3 days ago, going over my use case of Migaku. I believe that would be really helpful to you if I've intrigued you about Migaku so far, and these language learning tools / acquisition tools that I use to basically go about my language journey. They've been extremely helpful, far more than any other language learning app. And I never expected to get to this level or have this connection with any of the languages that I've studied so far. I can just apply the same mindset no matter what it is, no matter if it's Japanese, no matter if it's Mandarin Chinese, no matter if it's Vietnamese, no matter if it's Thai. These are the main languages that I've studied before. And right now, which is relevant to me, is studying Thai, and I can apply the same logic to Thai and enjoy the process, and on the side be acquiring a language in the background as well. The reality is that acquiring a language, learning a language, it's inherently a long-term process. So if you're able to distract yourself and truly enjoy the whole process and allow time to fly past you and just truly almost forget about the pain of engaging with the language learning process, even though or language acquisition process, and you don't even realize that you're doing it, that will be the best connection that you have and you're making something of the journey. So thus the destination will be far more satisfying when you finally get to it. Now this is it's possibly 80% of the whole language acquisition process. Then you have output to stress about when you reach intermediate / advanced phases in the language. However, I'm just making these videos to address beginner problems first, because if you don't start off well as a beginner, how will you ever see yourself through to become an intermediate, become advanced, and actually see your potential within a language? If you're hating the process already, why will you want to continue to the destination? And personally, for me, I have never actually reached my destination either. I've never reached conversational fluency. However, I know this is the exact process I need to undergo in order to be able to get into the position in where output will become more natural for me. And at this rate, for me, it's like a matter of time before I'm able to just reach that level of fluency, because I'm enjoying the process, and that's the main thing that matters, is enjoyment. If you hate it, you won't stick with it. I hated using Duolingo. At one stage, I ended up I hated using Pimsleur as well, and I really loved that app for a while. I really thought it was my saving grace, and then it just became really rigid, really boring. I've hated everything that hasn't been immersion, because immersion almost doesn't feel like you're acquiring a language at times, and that's the best thing. You get so distracted, so pulled into what you're immersing in, that's almost literally happening in the background, the whole acquisition process. But because I've defined the term before, you probably already know that, that's literally what's happening. So, I hope this information serves you well on your language acquisition / learning journey. Check out my other videos that I posted if you're curious about any specific tool. I did talk about flashcards very briefly. I do cover that once again in my video on Migaku, which I will make sure to at least have pop up some point throughout this video, and then in the description, linked in the description. If you've gained value from this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you like this type of content in regards to language learning, language acquisition, whatever it is language related. And if you like this particular type of content, it being long form, in where you can actually sit through and gain more of an understanding of the certain concepts that I'm going over, instead of just watching it in like a short form basic ass video. Like, you won't pay attention enough for the information to truly stick out and be valuable to you, in my opinion. So if you've gotten to the end of the video, I must say that your attention span is top 10% in comparison to a lot of other people here on this platform or on other platforms on social media. And from that, you will gain a lot from the content that you consume, and I hope you've gained something from the content in which I have provided for you so far. Anyways, this has been Ark Languages, Arkin, however you want to call me. I'll catch you in the next one.